Welcome back to On Board the Candidates. Today it's round 4 and we're going to have a look at Fabiano Caruana against Gukesh. So the game started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and Fabiano chose to play bishop c4, which is the start of the Italian. So the Italian is often a slow, strategic battle for the centre, lots of subtle moves, hidden ideas, but occasionally there can be sort of crazy sacks and attacks and very exciting game. So it can be can go either way. Depends on the player's preferences and what they're up to, what they fancy that day. Okay, so Gukesh plays bishop c5. Often a way of avoiding this sort of knight g5 idea. This move order with bishop c5 kind of prevents knight g5. It does give white the extra option of playing a dangerous gambit, an Evans gambit, where you sort of give up a pawn and get the centre basically. But Fabiano decides to sort of play a little bit more quietly, at least to begin with. He castles. Again, playing very principled chess, following the opening rules. It's already move 4, as with the previous game I covered, and he's already castled, so I would love that from anyone I'm coaching. Knight f6, again, very principled by Gukesh, following these opening rules. His knights are out, his bishop is out, he's ready to castle, and putting pressure on this e-pawn, starting the fight for the centre. Fabiano plays d3, protecting this e-pawn, and now Gukesh plays d6. Okay, you might think, why didn't he castle? And that's not a bad move, but often committing your king early, this is one of the subtleties in the Italian, committing your king early does sometimes make you sort of susceptible to sort of a quick attack down the sort of king side. So Gukesh hasn't castled yet, and that means that he could potentially leave his king in the middle and throw these pawns forward. The other thing is that this d6 protects the e-pawn, and it does threaten knight a5 now. So this is another subtlety in the Italian and sometimes the Lopez, that once this e-pawn is protected, then let's just say white wasted a move here, then there is an option potentially if he wants to sort of go after this bishop. And if he plays check, c6, and you can chase it all the way around and eventually take it if you want to. Okay, so there's nowhere for the bishop to hide. But only after this d6 move that's protecting the e5 pawn. Okay, so Caruana responds with c3, and so this sort of starts the battle again from the white side for the centre. He's looking to place d4 at some point potentially, but more subtly it also creates this hiding square for the bishop on c2 if he was to keep it. So now if black plays knight a5, check here, b5, now we have the c2 square, so you can keep the bishop and the knight looks a bit silly on a5. So there's sort of two reasons for this c3 move. So it's a little bit more subtle is that reason for hiding that bishop. Okay, so to c3, Gukesh responds with a6. There's lots of ways you can play for black here, but a6 prevents this bishop from going to b5. So again, it's very subtle, but now knight a5 is back on the cards. It also gives black a square to hide his bishop on a7. The other way that black can play sort of a5 gives this square for the bishop as well and prevents any sort of queenside expansion for white, b4. But it does give this b5 square potentially for the bishop. So after a6, knight a5 is on the cards again. So for example, if I played here, he could come here if okay, it's not a great move at this point, but he could play this and this bishop would be potentially sort of swapped off. So again, white plays a4. giving the bishop another square on a2 to come back to, starting sort of queenside expansion. Potentially he's going to be gaining space with sort of b4, b5 in the future if he wants to. Gukesh plays bishop a7. So this is prophylactic. It's a prophylactic move. So he is seeing that eventually white is going to play either b4 or d4, and both these moves would hit the bishop with a tempo. So bishop a7 is sort of preempting one of these pawn moves by white. It's also delaying castling, so it's keeping his options open. He could start this kingside attack if he wants to. If he castles, obviously it's off the cards. Right, so a6, a4, bishop a7 was played. So Caruana now plays h3. Not the most common move in this position. There's lots and lots of ways for white to play. Rook e1 is the most common move, which sort of supports this e pawn, helps d4 in the future, and gives the knight a square on f1, so that it can come round to this f5 square. It's a really, really common maneuver. This f5 square is a really, really nice square for a knight. And rook e1, another subtlety in the Italian, it's creating this it's supporting the center and giving this f1 square for the knight to come round. So that's the most common move. Knight a3 is another move, and that's again heading to that f5 square via a different route. It does something on the way though, and yeah, in chess we're always trying to do multiple things all at once. So at the moment you can see that these pieces are undeveloped. This knight a3 is interesting because, for example, after h6, knight c2, castles, the bishop on c1 gets developed, and the knight, which has already been developed, sort of takes it back, stops the pawns being doubled, and is heading to this f5 square. So it's quite an interesting plan. When we come up with plans, it's always good if we incorporate sort of as many positive points for ourselves as possible, and we managed to somehow develop both of these pieces, head to the f5 square and not double the pawns. So didn't need to take back with the f pawn. So that's an interesting plan. Caruana opted instead of those two plans to play h3. And I don't know for sure, but I guess that this was a bit of a provocation. Fabi wants to fight as white. He wants to try and have a sharp game rather than one of these quieter Italians, and he's inviting Gukesh to attack him now. So because Gukesh hasn't castled yet, he's playing h3 and he's saying, come and attack me. For people who are sort of earlier on playing chess, it's much harder to attack a king when the pawns in front of it are completely straight. So because to open this king up, you would need to get a pawn all the way down here. As soon as the pawns are not straight in front of the king, so after h3, it only takes a few moves now for black to potentially get a pawn to g4, and then the king is already starting to get opened up, because after h takes, the g file is going to be open and the king is on that file. So h3, a bit of a provocation, asking Gukesh potentially to play h6. So h2, h6, and after something like rook e1, g5 would come, and black is already better in this position. White is already in trouble because the king is going to be opened up, combined with this really, really nice bishop cutting across, a rook on g8. It won't be too long before the queen joins the party, and the king's going to be in trouble here. So rook e1 would be a mistake there. Fabi probably would have responded with something like bishop e3, getting rid of this really nice attacker. And so I'd imagine the game would continue in this. So Fabi probably had some sort of prep in this line lined up for Gukesh. Okay, so after castles, Gukesh didn't take the bait, he castled, indicating he wanted more of a strategic game, wanted to stay solid. So Fabi played knight d2, starting the development of the queenside pieces. Gukesh played rook e8. Now, the rest, if it's going to be a strategic game, there's not going to be sort of pawn storms at the king. The game is going to be about the centre. Who can win the centre? Who can dominate the centre? So there's lots of subtle moves now, all aimed at either supporting the centre or potentially supporting a d5 or d4 breaks. So rook e8 does two things. One, it supports the e5 pawn. If d5 gets played, the e pawn loses a defender, so the rook on e8 is defending this e pawn. The other thing that it does is that it supports a bishop potentially coming to e6, so that you swap off this nice bishop on c4, but without doubling your pawns. So Fabi now plays b4. Now you might think, oh, this is sort of attack on the queen side, but again, this is part of the play for the center. Okay, so this d4 square, which I want to push my pawn to at some point, is being defended by this knight on c6, and b4 introduces this annoying threat potentially in the future, not right now, but every move that white every move the black makes, he has to calculate b5 every time, just to make sure that it's not good. So I'm not going to play it now, but at some point I might play b5, move your knight out of the way, then play d4. So he has to calculate it. Gukesh plays bishop e6, as indicated by the sort of rook e8 plan, and he doesn't have to take back with the pawn here. Another subtle move Fabi played, which again is fighting for the center. Queen c2 indirectly protects this e pawn. So after d4, the queen would protect the e pawn. So I'm not going to play d4 straight away, but at some point in the future, I want to overprotect. So that's a word it's quite common in chess that we overprotect important points. So e4 is going to be a very important square in the future. And at the moment, it's defended twice and attacked only once, and yet Fabi feels the need to protect it again a third time. So yeah, it's overprotection, so you can potentially play d4 in the future. Gukesh retreats with rook e8. If he was to play something like d5, then which is a fine, decent move, we would not want to take on d5. We'd play something like knight b3. The knight is really good on b3. It can potentially hop onto the central squares. a5 potentially also protects the rook, so it makes the threat of b5 a little bit more serious. Okay, so at this point, if I played something like b5, then takes, my rook on a1 is loose. Okay, so I'm always telling my students, look out for loose pieces, even if they're well in your camp. So this rook on a1 is loose. It's never good to have loose pieces, because tactics can happen a bit later. So for example, if I played b5, takes, bishop takes f2, and then suddenly my loose piece on a1 is hanging. And while this doesn't win for black, it's equal. He's got a very nice equality, and it's going to be hard for white to play for a win here. So, for example, knight b3 sort of introduces this b5 threat potentially in the future as well. To h6, I could play something like bishop d2. Again, another subtle move. We're overprotecting b4 in this case. So, yeah, b4 is protected again. So at the moment, for example, bishop d2. At the moment, the b pawn is defended once, attacked once, and therefore, if we play c4 to fight for the center, it's going to be unprotected. So this bishop d2 move, while developing the bishop, it's subtly overprotecting b4. And therefore, after queen d7, we can start to think about playing c4 and play for the center. First, we're going to overprotect e4 again. Get rid of this knight, play c4, and starting to get a little bit awkward for black in the center now. He doesn't want to play this move because this bishop becomes terrible on a7, and he's got less space. And if he doesn't, then I'm just going to take here, okay? Potentially, if he defends this, then this e5 pawn is weak, yeah? So all these subtle moves like rook e1, you could see the reason for rook e1 is partly to overprotect e4, but also to target e5 in the future potentially. So a lot of these moves by white, they're just really subtle moves, setting up threats in the future. So Italian's a great opening to study, to sort of understand little subtleties in chess, and yeah, especially fighting for the center. Yeah. Okay, so that's just a sample line. For example, if you just play d5 instead. Gukesh instead retreated rook e8, rook e1. Again, with ideas like we saw in the other line, we're overprotecting e4, and we're also discouraging black from playing d5, because potentially, you know, if d5 at some point might be able to take and then win this e5 pawn in the future. h6 prevents a bishop coming to g5 at some point. And now white plays knight f1. So this is part of a common maneuver that I pointed out much earlier on, where the knight from b1 hops to f1 to g3 to f5. And this f5 square is even better for a knight now, because this white squared bishop is gone and h6 has been played. So because of that, when it arrives on f5, no bishop can take it. And if g6 hits this knight, then the h6 pawn is going to be really, really weak. So the fact that h6 has been played and that bishop, white squared bishop is gone, makes this maneuver even more powerful, which means that black can't just wait now. He has to do something, and he plays d5 to try and fight for the center to do something, because yeah, once this knight lands on f5, it's going to be quite dangerous potentially for black. Knight g3 carries on with the maneuver. And again, Gukesh, who's a very active player, he's obviously young, he's 17, he doesn't like just waiting around and sort of defending. So he opts for b5, it's a very, very active move, indicating he wants to fight on all parts of the board. If he was to do just, say, a normal move, something like queen d7, something like this kind of thing could happen if he just played normal moves. So knight f5, so this knight has gone all the way from b1 all the way around to this fantastic square on f5, and from this point it's doing a lot of stuff. It's sort of putting it, well, it's helping with the center, but also it's threatening to sort of help with an attack on the king. So for example, if rook d8, we're just improving our pieces, then already white has got this potentially nasty sacrifice, h6, opening up that king with a check. And if the king moves, the queen joins the party via c1. You can already see that lots of pieces are starting to come over to this king's side, and the king is in danger. The other knight might hop in via h4 and f5 potentially, and already black has only got one move to survive, which is knight h7. When we're attacking, we want to make sure that we attack with all of our pieces. So at the moment, just a queen and a knight is not going to do the trick really, usually. Okay, we want as many pieces as we can. Although, if we can prevent black's defenders from getting over there, and a queen and a knight might be enough. At the moment, we would love to play something like this and checkmate black on g7. But rook g8 just stops that, basically. And now I'd be thinking, okay, if I can't do that, So this rook g8 move is the only move saving him. Could I prevent that from happening, or could I get rid of this knight on c6 so that this other knight can join the party via e5? I can't do it at the moment because of here. But if I had already distracted that knight away, then potentially I could be taking on e5 and it would be nasty. Okay, so if we go back to the point where knight f5, where I was going to play knight f5, what if I distracted his knight away by playing this move first? And then we play the same line again. So after knight a5, then check, king h8, queen h6. Okay, he's got f6 that potentially saves him as well. Although after here, we actually gain some material back, and we're probably doing quite nicely here as white. There is another way, which is difficult to work out, to sort of distract black's forces away from the defense, and that is to take here first. So that's distracting the queen away from this f5 square, and now I play b5. If knight a5, check, the queen's not guarding that anymore, and after queen here, then he can't play f6 because the queen has been distracted away from this square. And there's mate. Okay, so the threat is a lot more powerful now. After rook g8, then queen here, and this knight joins in. It's not very nice at all for black. And if he takes here, I can take, and I'm distracting that queen and the knight away, so that when the queen comes over, this knight can take here, and now there's just way too many attackers over on this side for black to cope with. White is like a cool rook down, actually. I think a rook for 2 pieces, but after here, the final piece joins in the game. So when you're attacking, you want all your pieces to join in the attack if possible. And actually, if your opponent's got more pieces than you, it doesn't really matter if they're not doing anything, right? So his extra pieces are only going to be useful in an end game. So these pieces are not joining in the defense, and it's going to be really, really difficult to stop white from mating here. Actually, it's virtually impossible. So if I come here, for example, I can just take. And actually that's mate already. So you can see these sort of horrible attacks that potentially could happen. Gukesh didn't want to hang around, he played b5. And after knight f5, he took on e4 and played a really, really nice move here. A pawn sacrifice, knight e7. Okay, so he could see that this attack potentially was going to be overwhelming. White has also got positional trumps. He's got a good control of the center. He's got a really nice knight on f5, and Gukesh decided active defense. It was worth giving away a pawn to get rid of all of these good things. Okay, so the pawn, getting rid of the pawn's worth it. Giving up a pawn's worth it. Knight e7 sacrifices this e5 pawn, but this gets rid of this knight on f5. So we're equal on material apart from this one pawn. So this one pawn is the only thing that white has got extra now. But black's bishop is probably a little better. And this pawn is not fantastic. You know, this pawn is, in certain endgames, it's not going to be enough to win. So black's idea now, and this is a rule for all beginners starting out, when you're losing your material down, you want to swap pawns off. When you're winning, you want to swap pieces, usually. So for example, if white swapped all the pieces off, he would have probably a winning king and pawn endgame. But if you swap all the pawns off, then that's this would leave white with only one extra pawn, and that's not going to be enough to win. So Gukesh's plan is to swap all the pawns off on the queen side. So all of these. If he can swap all of these off, then the endgame is going to probably be drawn. So he starts off with c5, bishop f4, so he starts swapping some pawns off, and for example, if rook takes back, takes, bishop b8, these two pawns are probably going to swap for each other, and his plan is complete. Just the pieces on the king side is not going to be enough. So Fabiano tries to keep some stuff on, plays knight c6, queen d7, takes, he took on a7, and another fantastic move from Gukesh here. Instead of just recapturing this piece, he's obviously, Fabi is just a piece up now. Very, very precise move from Gukesh. He takes on b4, noticing that all of the knight's squares are covered. So he can't save this knight, he can't retreat it, he can't bring it out. If he tries to protect it, then after b3, attacks the queen, knight d5, and then yeah, basically like this knight is completely useless. It's out of the game, it's not coming back into the game, and therefore it's as if it's not an extra piece. These pawns on the queen side are occupying these two pieces, which means that these pieces in the center of blacks are going to be free to do whatever they want. And black actually has a very large advantage here. He will probably regather this knight at some point soon with a winning advantage. So very precise move. Instead of taking that knight back, taking here, and Caruana didn't want to try and save that knight. He took back, saying, please take my knight back. And another very precise move from Gukesh. Instead of just taking this knight back, he noticed that Fabiano's got 3 loose pieces. So whenever we have loose pieces, there are always tactical threats. You have to be careful. So I always tell students, be extremely careful. Try not to leave any pieces loose. If they are loose, then just be very, very careful. So whenever you've got lots of loose pieces, queens are fantastic at hitting loose pieces. So if you just draw a line from all the loose pieces and see where the lines meet, then you can see that if a queen could land on this square, it would be hitting all 3 at the same time. And this is a move that Gukesh played. He played queen d4, hitting all 3 of them at the same time, forcing Fabiano to protect after queen c1, and then he takes this one back. And what he achieved with that very precise move is the queen is on a worse square now on c1. If he hadn't done that, then just taken this move, this knight back, then after queen takes, the queen and rook are already working very well together. They're lined up and they're ready to play against this weakness on a6. And white would have some winning chances here. After queen d4, all the winning chances are gone. Queen c1 takes. He has to regather with the rook, and now all the pieces are uncoordinated. It's going to take a few moves to sort them out, get them in line. And by that time, the winning chances are gone, basically. Okay, so the plan is almost complete for Gukesh. He's swapped off all the pawns except for these 2. As long as he doesn't lose this a6 pawn, and he swaps it for this b4 pawn, it's going to be a draw. And he does this very precisely. So queen b7, attacking this b4 pawn. The knight attacks this b4 pawn. So he's tied everything down. 2 pieces have got to defend this now because 2 of them are attacking. This knight, importantly, is on a white square. It's on a white square. The bishop is dark squared, so it's never going to be attacked by that bishop, and it can't be attacked by a pawn. Bishop d6, queen c6 hits 2 loose pieces. The only way to not lose a piece is to rook a5, takes, queen e1. Check, very nice move, swapping off into a queen endgame. So queen endgames are very, very difficult to win, even if they are winning, because there's just so many checks. This is completely drawn, as this extra pawn is completely useless. It's never going to threaten to queen or to checkmate. It's a very comfortable draw from here on in. Almost no need to play through the moves, really. So lots of checks if the queen goes the other way. Definitely does not want to swap those queens off. Ideally, he just wants to swap these pawns off on the queen side, but it doesn't matter either way. Just to repeat the rule from earlier, when you're losing, when you're material down, you want to swap pawns, not pieces. So white would be desperate to swap the queens off. Black just wants to swap pawns off. A few checks, and the pawns get swapped off. So this is what black wants. Now all he has to do is just to check and make sure that he doesn't swap his queens off. So he just checks and checks and checks, and eventually they agree a draw. So very interesting game. Very, very well played by Gukesh. He played very, very, very well. Didn't give Fabiano much of a chance at all. The sacrifice was really, really good. If he did not spot that, then he would have been in big trouble, as the attack that I showed. His king was going to be in trouble soon, so he did need to sacrifice that pawn. And I'd recommend for anyone who's looking to improve their strategy and positional play to study the Italian. It's an opening that'll teach you a lot about chess if you don't play it yourself. So I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends if you found it useful. So thank you. We'll see you for the next round.